All right, let's go ahead and begin. Again, welcome. Thanks so much for joining us. You have found your way to the webinar on loneliness, specifically titled When Loneliness Becomes Overwhelming. I'm Kelly Haer, and I direct the Relationship IQ program at the Boone Center for the Family at Pepperdine University. If you're not familiar with the Boone Center for the Family, the Boone Center is a training and resource center dedicated to helping the church, Christian organizations, and academic institutions strengthen healthy relationships. Again, we're a training and resource center dedicated to helping the church, Christian organizations, and academic institutions strengthen healthy relationships. This webinar is one webinar in a series aimed to help the church help their congregants navigate this time during COVID. Let me share my screen with you here, and we will jump in more fully. Okay, so here we are. A quick overview of where we're headed. We're going to talk about the anatomy of loneliness. We're going to talk about learning to assess where loneliness is located, follow that up by talking about accepting loneliness, and finally ending our time with talking about how to specifically address and not aggravate loneliness. All right, and the plan is to do this, have this conversation in about 20 minutes, and then we'll end with 10 minutes of Q&A. So what is the impact of loneliness on relationships? The Boone Center for the Family partnered with the Barna Group prior to COVID to assess the state of relationships in the church. And we assessed loneliness and other mental and emotional health issues, including anxiety and depression, addiction, pornography, marriage, parenting, and singleness. We were asking questions to understand to what extent do congregants feel that their church leadership is helping them navigate and walk through these issues in life. And the study discovered that among US adults, about 32% of people experience loneliness on a regular basis, and the percent for practicing Christians was 29%. Now we know in other studies since the COVID epidemic, those rates are higher, and that about half of US adults are indicating that they are experiencing loneliness regularly. In our study, we found that women experience higher rates of loneliness than men. And the rates of loneliness varied by generation. I'm going to give you all a chance to think about and guess which generation you think has experienced the highest rates of loneliness. So I think I need to stop my screen share to offer you all the poll. Okay, so I want you to consider, submit your answer to which generation do you think experiences the highest rates of loneliness. Got millennials, Gen X, boomers, and traditionalists. All right, so the answers are coming in. I'm going to give another minute here for these responses, and then I will share the results with you here. So which generation do you think experiences the highest rates of loneliness? Okay, I'm going to go ahead and stop this here and share the results with you. So you all are correct. Half of you guessed that millennials experience the highest rates of loneliness, and that is correct. Studies have found, both our study with the Barna Group prior to COVID and now during the COVID pandemic, that these trends are the same, that the younger a person is, the more likely they are to experience loneliness. And this flies in the face to what we have. You know, traditionally people have, when they picture a person who's lonely, they tend to picture someone who's older. And this is no longer the case. That it's more apt now to picture a younger person, say maybe scrolling on their phone, as an image of loneliness versus someone who's older sitting by themselves. Okay, so good job on that. Let me stop this here. Okay. And let's talk about the anatomy of loneliness. So if we've established that loneliness is having a significant impact on our lives right now, what is loneliness at the end of the day? So as Christians, we understand that God is a relational God and we are created in his image. And what this means is that humans are fundamentally, at the core, relational beings. That being in relationship with others and God is not optional, that it's truly a need, that humans need to be in relationship with others because we image God. And when we're not in relationship with others, when we're not connecting with others, we aren't truly thriving. So loneliness, the feeling of loneliness, functions as an indicator or a signpost that we're lacking connection, that our needs for connection and relationship aren't being met. And this is very similar to if a light went off on the dashboard of your car, indicating that your car needed a certain service, or let's say the light indicated that your tire pressure was low. The idea would be that that light on the dashboard would prompt you to take action. It would prompt you to do something, to put more air in your tires or take your car in to get serviced to prevent harm and ensure well-being of the car. So loneliness is that sign, is a feeling to direct you to take action. It's indicating that your relational needs aren't being met, that something in your world of necessary connection is amiss. So if we've established, again, that loneliness is an indicator of an unmet need, it's important that we're able to assess the location of loneliness. And that may sound like strange language. Where is loneliness located? Well, we know that we are created for relationship with God, others, and ourselves. Now you may think, okay, yes, of course, creative relationship with others and God, this makes sense. But what do I mean by creative relationship with ourselves? This is often a neglected category of relationship that we don't think about or give enough attention to. So just as we relate with others, we relate with ourselves. Relationship is composed of knowing, being known, being reflected to. And so within ourselves, we want to be able to know our thoughts, our feelings, our values, and our experience, and be able to respond to ourselves, to be able to respond to our experiences and our feelings with a sense of empathy and care. Another way of thinking about this is being able to process your thoughts and feelings. When you have processed your thoughts and feelings, you know them, you have awareness. And this is all a part of relationship with self. So I've created a short questionnaire survey to help you assess loneliness. If you'll share the link on the Q&A, that would be great. And this is a document that each of you can download after our session this morning, and it will guide you through assessing your relationship with God, your relationship with others, a variety of other people in your life, and your relationship with yourself to help you identify where your loneliness might be coming from. And it's important to note that sometimes we feel loneliness when we're lonely, and other times that loneliness can register as sadness, depression, or even anger. And so if you're thinking for yourself, or if you're thinking for someone that you're helping who's lonely, you may consider, this person is presenting depressed or angry, but it's possible that they're actually struggling with loneliness, particularly during this time of COVID, when so many relational structures in our lives have been torn down, that we aren't seeing people as regularly as we normally do. So I encourage you to check out that assessment inventory to help you determine where your loneliness is located, and not just to assume that the loneliness for you is coming from relationship with others, but it could be relationship with yourself or relationship with God. An example in my own life of loneliness with self to help flesh out this concept, as I expect it to be the new one here. I became a mom 9 months ago. And at that time, as you might imagine, the demands in my life increased a lot. All of a sudden, here's this young, tiny baby to take care of. And at that time, my relationship with myself suffered. No longer did I have the same amount of time to think and feel and be aware of what was going on with me. So there's an example of how relationship with self can suffer. And during this time, for so many, they have heightened stresses in the midst of COVID, and our relationship with ourselves are suffering. Okay, so if we've assessed where the loneliness is coming from, the first step here, which you may not like, but hang on and we'll talk more specifically. But the first step is to begin to accept loneliness. You may think, oh, that sounds like a drag. You know, I want to fix loneliness. I want to eradicate loneliness. I want to make it all better. Well, yes, there's a lot we can do to directly address loneliness, but it's really important that we understand and have an attitude of accepting loneliness, not expecting that we can eradicate it completely. Now, why would this be? Remembering that God made the world good and perfect, and sin entered into the world. And what this means is that there is brokenness and that there are things that are not the way they're supposed to be in all aspects of life. So as we were created for relationship with God, ourselves, and others, sin impacts our ability to have great and perfect connections in all three of these dimensions. So it's important to appreciate that loneliness before Jesus' return is never going to be eradicated completely. But there will always be a lingering sense of disconnection in relationship with God, ourselves, and others. And sometimes realizing that the goal and the expectation is not to never experience loneliness again can help diminish the intensity with which we experience loneliness. As a therapist working with clients who struggle deeply with depression, I've noticed that often these clients can perceive others who aren't officially depressed as if they're always happy and they never have low mood, when that isn't the case. Even if someone's not clinically depressed, it doesn't mean they're always happy all the time. And the same is true with loneliness. Even if you're not extremely lonely, it doesn't mean that you're never going to experience loneliness. So having an attitude of acceptance can be helpful. Also, we want to address loneliness specifically. So if you've identified that you're lonely in the dimension of relationship with others, then it's important to reach out for connection to the other people in your life where you've identified the loneliness exists. So for example, with friendships, I used to be able to see some friends regularly before this time of COVID, and now that's changed. In the absence of seeing some of those friends, it's been important for me to reach out to them in other ways. For instance, started adding a structure of talking to my one friend, Laura, each week. And having this structure in place to build back connection has been really helpful to address loneliness for me in the dimension of friendships. So I do really want to highlight this idea of adding structure where so much structure has been taken away from us, to help address loneliness and relationship with others. So you might plan to have a regular walk with a person, and maybe it's a social distance walk, but it's a regular planned activity that can be helpful, or planned video calls. Even just last night, actually, I was on a video call with friends from college. Reaching out to people who are even at a distance right now can be a helpful way to build back greater connection in your life. If you're experiencing loneliness with yourself, it can be important to take time to reflect, to journal, to listen to music. A lot of times music stimulates feelings and feelings stimulates thoughts. Personally, I started listening to John Mayer more. John Mayer is a singer who I listened to a lot in college. And I found that as I listen to his songs now, it stimulates a lot of thought and reflection and memories from the past, which helps to restore connection with myself. In relationship with God, you can add the structure of participating in a Bible study. Maybe it's a digital Bible study online or something you download, making it a point to sing hymns and focus in on what the words are actually saying as a way to meditate on God's goodness and his character. You could take specific time to lament and to bring to God your hurts and your sorrows in this time, to practice solitude, to practice gratitude, The point here is making it clear and explicit to reach out for connection in the areas that you've identified loneliness. And it's important that that connection include authenticity and vulnerability, to present yourself in ways that demonstrate, hey, I'm happy and I'm enjoying life in these ways, and this is where I'm hurting. This is where life is difficult. When we're willing to share the good, the bad, and the ugly, greater connection is built off of that. I'm going to share a slide here now as we transition to talking about how not to aggravate loneliness. So sometimes we're lonely, and this is a natural experience that we're going to have, and then we respond to it in a way that we make the loneliness worse. So I want you to think about, when you feel lonely, how do you feel about yourself? So if we know you're feeling lonely, how do you feel about you in the midst of loneliness? And I'll give you a personal example here to help bring this to light. And this framework that I'm walking through right now comes from the Pain and Peace Cycle framework of the Relate Strong program at the Boone Center. I'm not going to explain the Pain and Peace Cycle explicitly, but what I'm walking you through draws from that framework. So if you're interested in this framework, you can check out our first webinar on the Pain and Peace Cycle. You can see that on demand, and that will give you lots more information on the Pain and Peace Cycle. Okay, so in my own life, when I am feeling lonely in relationship with my husband, I will tend to feel out of control, as though something within myself is out of control. So when my husband, Adam, he's an introvert, and when he experiences greater stress, he requires more time alone to cope. So COVID, time of stress, his knee-jerk reaction is to pull away and have more time by himself. And that can leave me feeling lonely and out of control. So the next question to ask is, when you're feeling this certain way about yourself, and maybe you're feeling unloved, insignificant, as the slide indicates, what do you do when you have this feeling? So when I feel this sense of out of control because I'm feeling disconnected from my husband as he's taking his greater introvert time in a time of stress, I tend to respond with blame. That's my go-to response. And maybe I'm not blaming him out loud overtly with my words, but inside, internally, I'm carrying this demeanor attitude of it's all his fault. And that will seep out in irritability. Others, if you're feeling unloved in your loneliness, you might go to a place of shame and feeling bad about yourself. So you want to, again, ask yourself, what do you do when you feel how you feel about yourself in the midst of loneliness? And then consider, how do these behaviors impact your relationships? So you can imagine, in my example, if I'm relating with my husband out of a sense of irritability, holding on to this blame, what's going to happen in relationship with us? He's going to pull more away from me if I'm not treating him well and kindly, and that's going to create greater relational disconnection. So to, again, consider, how do you feel about you? What do you do when you feel that way? And how do those behaviors impact your relationship? So of course we need a better way forward if that's our pain cycle. So it's better to respond with the truth to how you're feeling. So if I'm feeling out of control in the midst of loneliness, I can remind myself that what is true is that God is in control, and I do have some control. There are things I can do to help address the disconnection I'm feeling. So for me to live out the truth, instead of harboring a sense of blame towards my husband, it's better if I reach out to him with nurture. So I might ask him, how are you doing in the midst of this stressful time? And what's going to happen as I reach out to him with nurture? We're going to restore our relational connection, and that's going to help us. So I invite you to do the same and to consider, how can you respond with truth to your feelings? What would it be for you to live out the truth? And you can see those 4 different options there, and recognize how that healthier way of responding to the truth will impact your relationship by creating greater connection. So we're going to end here for the lecture portion of this webinar. So I hope it's helpful to you to consider the great impact that loneliness is having on so many right now, that we are created for relationship, that loneliness is a signpost that a need is being unmet. We want to consider where that need is being unmet, whether it's in relationship with God, ourselves, and others, and seek to reach out and directly address the loneliness we're facing, all the while knowing that we're not going to eradicate loneliness altogether. All right. Sharon, do we have questions?
Yes, Kelly, we do. We have a couple of questions. The first question is, how do you motivate people to reach out when they're in a pit of loneliness?
Great
What are
question.
some suggestions?
This here, one second. How do you motivate others to reach out when they're in a pit of loneliness? I think of this image. So if you have, let's say this is the person who's in a pit of loneliness, and you're standing over here thinking, what's your problem? You're super lonely. And you say, hey, why don't you do all these different things? Like, come over here and be with me and let's be social. Their knee-jerk reaction is probably going to feel to be misunderstood or not connected with. So to motivate a person who's really struggling with loneliness, I would ask yourself, what is it for you to join them in their loneliness and go to them and ask them to tell you more about what's going on, to seek to create connection with them right where they are. And from that connection, from being connected with you, you might be able to then walk together to go do something else that would help to connect them to others.
It's really helpful. Thank you. A couple more questions have come in. How would you handle a situation where you reach out to your husband and he acts snappy because he is a withdrawer? So your perfect example of you and Adam, how do you handle that situation?
Yeah, I think I would remember that, even if I'm managing to, I'll use our Boone Center Relate Strong language here, live out of my peace cycle, live out of the truth, it doesn't mean that he is absolutely going to respond well at every moment. And I think I would want to continue to give him space and realize he's an introvert, he's coping differently at a different time frame, and to try to not exacerbate things in that moment and say, I'm going to remain in my peace cycle. I'm going to remain living out of truth, seeking to nurture him and give him time and space, and trusting that over time, that will help the situation, but not looking for an immediate change necessarily.
Good. Here's another question. How do you deal with loneliness during COVID when you've lost a spouse and you're actually alone?
That's a great question. So being physically alone without a spouse, I think it would be important to identify certain friends or family members who are significant in your life that you have trust with, and seek to share with them the sorrow and the pain that you are experiencing, to be able to put words to and express it, to seek connection in other relationships, and knowing that that loneliness and that ache, that longing for the loss of a spouse is not going to go away. I think it can ebb and flow and dissipate. It can be helped by being known. That's the heart of relationship, being known by others in your pain.
Great. Yeah. The fact that pain just doesn't go away and sometimes it's been exacerbated is really a reality, I think, during this time. And a next question here. How come sometimes even when you get on Zoom and you interact with people, how does technology fit into loneliness during this time when we maybe are having several Zoom connections or meetings a day, and then we suddenly at the end of the day continue to feel a sense of loneliness? How does technology fit into that?
Yes. FaceTime calls, Zoom calls are great to connect with others, but it is not the same as being in the flesh, in person. I have felt this very personally, being on tons of Zoom calls, and it doesn't leave me with the same sense of connection that I would have in person. I have found, there was an article too I read, one by Kurt Thompson, acknowledging that we are embodied creatures, that We have a body, and our physical body is important, and our bodies are being neglected relationally, that we aren't able to be able to shake hands, give a person a hug, and really recognizing that, the visual connection through Zoom is an anemic connection. It is not the same as being in person. So I think it's really validating that, to recognize that we are embodied people, and to not expect for Zoom to meet our relational needs for in-person connection. I'm not sure if I'm hitting the question specifically. I don't know if you want to go back to a part of that, Sharon.
Well, no, I think you are. I mean, the idea that the expectation that being on Zoom is going to be like being together. I know we've all experienced walking outside and seeing a neighbor's face and getting excited that we just saw somebody.
Yeah. On Zoom, there's this oddity of you see people's eyes, but you're not having eye contact.
Yeah.
And that's really not normal. That is not natural. Our bodies aren't meant for that. And we miss so many of those small nuances and physical cues of emotion that we see on each other's faces that we can't perceive over the screen. And that's taxing for our brains and our bodies to not have that type of feedback and input in a communication.
Yeah.
And I hear you in terms of, seeing a neighbor. Yesterday we had the internet repair person from Spectrum over, and I really had this experience of like, oh my gosh, it's a physical person like, coming into the apartment that I'm going to say more than just hi and bye to, versus when I go for a walk and I see a person, it's like hi, bye, and that's it. But it's like, oh, this is a person who's here. And I was like, wow, I have, had so little physical interaction with anyone other than my husband and child.
Yeah, I think that's really important. We do have more questions, and we're going to be able to answer. We do have one more question. Kelly, you might put up your slide as you answer this last couple of questions, or I'm going to summarize for you of our upcoming webinars. And those of you whose questions we didn't get answered, if you would email us at the Boone Center, we'll get an answer to you. I do think I want to say there's one question about singleness and loneliness, and Kelly is an expert in the area on singleness, and we have a lot of information that can be helpful to you on singleness and loneliness at the Boone Center. If you would send us an email, we would be happy to answer that for you. And then a recommendation for resources. We'll be sending an email out to everybody here with recommendation of some resources that we have. A specific question here about an adult child at home who's struggling with depression. If you would send us a question as well, we can specifically send you information. One question I'd like you to answer, Kelly, this is from a pastor, and I really appreciate all of you who are church leaders and trying to help people with the experiences of loneliness. But his question is, does listening to posted sermons on YouTube alleviate loneliness? Does it help us connect? So can you talk just a little bit for those of us that are Christian leaders trying to help others? Does providing resources of something they can listen to help? So thanks, Kelly.
That's a good question. I would say it depends. And I would encourage people to pay attention to, how do you feel after, you've spent X amount of time on, listening to a video sermon? Does this heighten a sense of disconnection of, normally I would be sitting, in a pew next to someone listening to this sermon. How do I feel afterwards? Obviously, it's important to be receiving God's truth in various capacities. If there's a way to, you share a video sermon, but then encourage people to be able to connect over a Zoom call and have discussion to bring some relationship to bear over the consumption, the taking in of the sermon, I think would be helpful to add a relational element. But sometimes I think sermons could just straightforwardly be helpful, and other times it could exacerbate a sense of loneliness as a reminder of the absence of connection that normally surrounds attending church. All right, thank you all so much for attending. And this webinar will be available on demand later. on our website. And we look forward to seeing you next week, same time, same place, when Sharon is going to share with us about anxiety.